But, that time's coming. We've done that a few times on some things already. But we're going to be back in the book of 1 Timothy. The book of 1 Timothy, we've been going through chapter 3, these qualifications of a pastor. We wrapped that up. And now we're into the qualifications of a deacon. Now, I'll recap a few things that we talked about last time, right? No surprise. Anytime we're doing a series, I always like to recap where we've came from. Last time, we read the verses here in 1 Timothy chapter 3, but we really spent most of our time actually talking about what the rest of the Bible has to say about deacons, right? And we turned over to the book of Acts, and of course the story where the apostles were dealing with a dispute that came up in the church because the Grecian widows felt like they were being neglected, whereas the Hebrew widows were not. And the apostles basically came to the church and said, listen, we need to be studying, we need to be praying, we need to be preaching and teaching and doing these things. It's not right that we would leave off those things to serve tables. And that idea of being a waiter or an attendant is really what that word kind of comes down to. It's not saying that taking care of the widows wasn't important, but it had gotten to be such a big task, they couldn't do both. They couldn't do that and do the prayer and the study and the preaching and the teaching and the leading that they needed to do. And so they proposed that the church call out 7 men, and they gave them some qualifications. They need to be full of faith. They need to be full of the Holy Ghost. In other words, they need to be men who have already proved their faithfulness and their lifestyle. And then the church, and I say that right, the church went and picked 7 men. The church, they liked that idea. They selected 7 men. Those men were prayed over and hands laid on them, and they were given that duty of serving tables, that idea of some of the daily ministrations that are needed in the church, right? Taking care of the widows was part of that. I think there's probably other daily ministrations that could be included in that, but that is the very specific one we were given. We went and talked about how that it is considered an actual, we believe it's considered an actual office within the church, right? They were ordained. They were prayed over and hands laid on them. Similar to the way a new preacher would be, or somebody that's being ordained to be sent off as a missionary. But the roles in the church would be a pastor, an overseer, and a deacon. And we read a couple of verses that talked about why part of why we believe that, right? There's a few verses where it talks about all of the saints. We're talking to you, all of the saints, and the bishops and the deacons. We talked about that a little bit. We talked about the controversy that surrounds the role of deacon. There's 2 parts we talked about, right? One is that sometimes the role of deacon turns into this power play. I have seen that in churches before where you end up with a few deacons. They become the deacon board. The deacon board tends to take over, and they run the church, not just the daily ministrations of taking care of the widows and the things that the elder doesn't have time to do, but literally they become the ones that start to dictate what the church is going to do. That's not their original intent. That's not what the Bible describes. And then we talked about the other controversy is whether or not women can be deacons. And we talked about the fact that here in 1 Timothy chapter 3, and we'll get into that here, if not today, probably next Sunday, about it's pretty clear that this is the role of a man in the church. And we a couple things we talked about, right? The apostles' direction was specifically to call out 7 men. All 7 people that the church went and picked were men. And sometimes the Bible uses the word man or men in a generic sense, and it just means humans. That is not the word that's in the book of Acts. It is literally the word that means male. Go pick out 7 males is what the apostles told them. There's a chapter that talks about, Paul's writing this letter to the Romans. It's Romans chapter 16, first verse, I think, and he talks about, he commends to them Phoebe, who is a servant of the church at Cenchrea. That word servant is the same word that in other places is labeled or translated deacon. Some people take that verse and say, see, women were deacons. Phoebe was a deacon. But we talked about the fact that you have to be careful taking a word that has multiple meanings and just applying the one you want, right? Because the word servant, the same one that's translated deacon, there are places where the government magistrates, that same word is used. There's a place where the followers of Satan are referred to in that same word, right? Phoebe was a servant of the church at Cenchrea. She was very faithful and she did much, but that does not mean that she had actually had prayed over her, hands laid on her, and officially ordained as a deacon, right? All of us should be showing a servant's heart and love and compassion and care for those that are in need. We should all be doing that, right? But that doesn't mean that because Phoebe was showing those characteristic traits that she was an ordained, elected deacon, okay? Now, I also point out, we don't have any deacons here at Wheatfield, right? It's not because I don't think that deacons are a real thing. It's not because of that. If we grow and we get to the point where daily ministrations can't be taken care of in this type of order, it would be fairly normal and no issue with us electing a deacon or deacons. But the first church didn't have them until they had a need for them, right? So that is kind of the position that we're in at this point. So those are a recap of all of the things that we covered last week. And the plan today is to go in and look verse by verse here in 1 Timothy chapter 3 as we think about the deacons. We're going to go ahead and read verses 8 through 13, and then we'll come back and focus on that first verse. It says, likewise must the deacons be grave, not double-tongued, not given to much wine, not greedy of filthy lucre, holding the mystery of the faith in a pure conscience. And let these also first be proved, then let them use the office of a deacon, being found blameless. Even so must their wives be grave, not slanderers, sober, faithful in all things. Let the deacons be the husbands of one wife, ruling their children and their own houses well. For they that have used the office of a deacon well purchase to themselves a good degree and great boldness in the faith which is in Christ Jesus. So as you look at these verses, the first word you want to notice is likewise, right? This idea is indicating similarly, right? Just like we had this list of things and qualifications for a pastor, there is also a list of qualifications for a deacon. So the word likewise kind of means in the same way, is maybe the way that we would do it here in modern English. In the same way as pastors had qualifications, or as they had things they needed to be, so do deacons. Now, we get into some words here that are interesting. This word grave, I may have actually talked about this a little bit already. I'm going to hit it again. It's so interesting to me. How many of you look at that word and go, the deacon has to be stoic. He's got to be serious, right? When we think about the word grave, well, honestly, we think about somebody being buried probably, right? Most of us. But the word grave can mean like serious, somber. That's not actually what this word means. This word, when you look it up in like a Strong's dictionary or Thayer's dictionary, the word kind of is another word that we don't really use, venerable, which really, I'll read like a Webster's dictionary for you, accorded a great deal of respect, especially because of age, wisdom, or character. The idea here, when you go on to read some of this, is basically one that has a good, honorable character. Okay? So this word grave here is dealing with the idea of what is your character? Are you an honorable, upstanding, well-respected person? I also like the idea that the definition gives with it the idea of that it's this idea of one that deserves that honor and respect. Okay? So a deacon must be grave, deserving of respect, and living a life that is respectable or honorable. Not double-tongued. The idea here, I think we can get this. It's really, Thayer's, I like the way Thayer says it, saying one thing with one person and then saying something else with another person, right? This idea of I'm going to say whatever I need to say to get what I want. And if I got to tell you something and I got to tell you something else, that's what I'll do. Or I come to you and I say, Elliot, this is what we're going to do because I think that you deserve to have X. But then when I walk away from you, I walk over and go, that Elliot, man, he doesn't deserve it. I'm going to give it to somebody else, right? Double-tongued, right? You do deserve it. It's okay. You can. Double-tongued, right? Now, what do you think of when you hear that phrase, double-tongued? What do you think of? I don't know what you think of. I can think of a couple things. I think of somebody that's trying to sell me something, and they're just saying whatever they got to say to get it, right? I also think of a little snake, like a little tongue comes out, and it's a little forked little tongue, right? And a snake, a little forked tongue. Listen, the idea here, right, is somebody that's not going to be honest. They're not going to be forthright. Not given to much wine. Now, not given to, that's this idea when you look that up, is it's interesting. It's to hold in mind. How would we say that? Like, their thoughts are much on wine. Like, if you've ever met an alcoholic, they have trouble making it through the day without dwelling on, thinking about, wanting that thing, right? Not given to much wine. We recently went through the book of Proverbs, right? This is a very similar statement to what was given in a pastor. I don't know if this is intentional or not. I will say that in the pastor's section, it says not given to wine, period. Not given to wine. When it talks about the deacon, it says not given to much wine. I don't know that I would read a whole lot into that. It is a slight distinction. Me personally, I think anybody in a leadership role especially needs to think about the verses in Proverbs that talk about this idea that wine is a mocker. Wine will trick you. Wine will get you to do and say stupid things, right? And it will entrap you. Your best bet, whether you are in a leadership role or not, is to just avoid the stuff. It's my opinion, right? It is a mocker. Proverbs also talked about the idea, and it was toward the end, chapter 30, chapter 31, somewhere around in there, and it talked about the idea that wine is not for the king and wine is not for the princes, the strong drink, right? And it goes on to talk about the fact that because it will cause you to pervert judgment. You are in a position of needing to make decisions between disputes among people. You are, as a ruler and as a chief of among the people, you have a position where you're going to be resolving disputes. You're going to be making decisions about policy. You're going to be making decisions that affect people's lives. Wine will pervert your judgment. It's pretty clear in the book of Proverbs. And if you've ever been around somebody that's had a little bit to drink, you realize pretty quickly they start being a little bit more freer with the things they're thinking and the things that they do. And it doesn't take very long until they're doing things that they normally would have enough self-control to not do, right? So I want you to think about those things, and then let's do this last one here for this verse, and then we'll take up a thought. It ends with saying, not greedy of filthy lucre. Not greedy of money. Not out to get whatever they can get. You think about somebody for being hyper-focused on how much money they can build up. And what generally happens is that person, if they're not careful, if you really let greed seep in, you start to make decisions that are going to be to your benefit, not necessarily decisions that are right. Get out of this situation, okay? I want you to think about those things. Needs to be somebody that's honorable and deserves respect. Living a life that's honorable and deserving of respect. Not double-tongued, right? They're not saying one thing over here and saying something else over here, or saying something over here and then doing the opposite. Somebody that's not going to be susceptible to wine making a mockery of them. Somebody that's not going to let wine pervert their judgment. And then somebody whose driving force and driving factor is not what they can get out of it. From a very practical perspective, why would it be important for the 7 people that they picked in the book of Acts to be the first 7 deacons? Why would it be so important for those characteristic traits? I mean, it's a pretty practical answer, actually. What were they going to be responsible for based on Acts? What had happened? Well, there was a dispute between 2 groups of people. What did I talk about when I said that the wine is a mocker and wine is going to pervert judgment? These 7 men, and many men after that, have now been put in positions where, listen, part of what they were going to do is the daily ministration, but they were stepping into something where there was already dispute. They needed to have good judgment. They needed to be able to sort out he said, she said, what are the facts, and what's actually happening. You know what? They needed to be men you could trust, because they were going to go into this tense situation where there was already dispute, and there were some being taken care of and some not being taken care of. And they needed to be able to step into that using good judgment and to be respected by the people. What would have happened if you had picked 7 men where one group or the other didn't trust them? It's going to be hard to be put in that position and have people respect you and believe that you're going to do what's right. Interestingly enough, the dispute was between the Hebrew widows and the Grecian widows. I don't know this for sure, but some of the names of those 7, what the scholars and the other things tell us is that those were names. So likely to be people that the parties that were feeling neglected would have been able to trust. So I think you see that good judgment, being a respected and an honored person already, I think, is critical, right? They needed to already be people that were well respected and had lived honorable lives. How good would it have been to step into that type of situation where there's a dispute between 2 people and you're trying to come in and make sure that you're taking care of the widows, but you're known for somebody who says one thing over here and something else over here? It wouldn't have went very well, would it? Because how could this group believe you? Yes, what you're saying sounds good, but we know you have a reputation for saying what you think I want to hear and then go telling the other group what they want to hear. Wouldn't have worked very well. And how about not greedy of filthy lucre? Well, what was part of their responsibility? to make sure that the widows were taken care of. How do you do that? Generally speaking, you got to have money. At a minimum, you got to have money to go buy the resources that those people need. More than likely, from what we see in the case, since this was actually a church-sanctioned thing, probably money coming out of the church's treasury. You ever known those kind of businessmen, or those people, maybe they're businessmen, maybe they're people that have been put in charge of a charity or some kind of project, and you ever heard those stories about people that, yeah, they do what they're supposed to do, but they buy the cheapest stuff they can buy, and then they pocket the excess, right? We're giving you $100 because we think that thing costs $95. And then they go out and they buy something for $60 and they pocket the difference, right? These were going to be men that were going to be having access to the treasury of the church to be used for the people, to help these people. They needed to be men that were not greedy. There's lots of reasons why the Lord wants these characteristic traits. I'm not saying it's just from a practical perspective, but I think sometimes we miss how practical some of these qualifications really are, right? In today's world, a lot of churches, from a deacon's perspective, I do think that we've kind of added on to some of the responsibilities. That's okay if that's what the church wants to do. I think we need to be careful thinking that it's, like this is what the deacon's role is. But listen, most of the time in most churches, if it's done right, the deacon is going to be responsible for taking care of different business aspects of the church. They're probably going to have access or can request funds from the church. When the pastor's not there, they might be involved in some of the decision making. Oftentimes in churches that do have deacons, not always, but sometimes the deacons are also some of the guys that do the teaching of Sunday school, or they do the devotion service, or they fill in for the pastor when he's gone. It's not uncommon that teaching and things like that become part of that role. Those people need to be people that have proven themselves to have a respectable, honorable life, that are not double-tongued, not given to wine, and aren't greedy. It fits very well, in my opinion, right? I think it fits well. And you would absolutely want to see that in those 7 men that were chosen back in the book of Acts. Next verse, holding the mystery of the faith in a pure conscience. I think here this would go back in my mind a couple different ways. In the book of Acts, they said pick out 7 men full of faith, or full of the Holy Ghost, and of faith, right? These should be men, even though maybe their task was to take care of the widows and the daily ministrations of the things of the church. That didn't mean they just needed to be honest men that weren't greedy. It also meant that they should be men that have held fast to the gospel, to the faith that we believe. These needed to be faithful men. Men that wanted to serve the Lord. I don't think you have any doubt when you go back in the book of Acts and you look at Stephen. Him and Philip are probably the 2 most well-known of the deacons, right? I don't think you would call into question either one of those guys that they held strong to the faith, right? Stephen ended up being a martyr. What was he doing when he was martyred? Was he feeding the widows? Actually, he was declaring the gospel, right? Holding the mystery of the faith in a pure conscience. I think this also not just talks about that they're holding to the faith, but that faith drives what they do, and that they are living their life with a pure conscience. I actually like part of the way that John Gill says it. He says the doctrine, when it says holding the mystery of the faith, the doctrine of the gospel, called the faith because it contains things to be believed, proposes Christ, the object of faith, is the means by which faith comes, and it is unprofitable without it. It is called the mystery because it is a divine revelation and could never have been discovered by human reason, and it is now revealed The modus of many things contained in it remains a mystery. Several of the doctrines of it are mysterious ones, particularly the doctrine of the Trinity, in which the ancient Jews called by the very name the mystery of faith, the incarnation of the Son of God, the union of the saints to Christ, their communion with Him, the resurrection of the dead. Now these mysteries, mysterious doctrine of faith, is to be held by deacons. They are to profess it and to hold fast the profession of it. Again, some of that would not 100%, I don't know that I buy all of that mystery part. I get some of what he's saying. But he basically talks about that we're talking about the faith that we believe, and that it is about, it proposes Christ, it points people to Christ, and the deacons are supposed to profess it and hold fast to it. Right? He says about in a pure conscience, with a conscience sprinkled by the blood of Christ, with a conscience void of offense both towards God and man, with a suitable life and conversation, a conversation becoming the gospel of Christ and by which it is adorned. And this part of their character is necessary that such may be able to help those who are weak in faith. I like that, right? This idea that their life is supposed to reflect that they have been bought by the blood of Jesus Christ and that they are holding to and professing faith. Okay? In verse 10, let's think about this for a minute. And let these also first be proved, then let them use the office of a deacon, being found blameless. You know what this verse is saying? Don't ordain somebody into the role of a deacon who has not already proven themselves. Think back to the role of a pastor. One of the things that was mentioned, two things. They were to be blameless. They were to not be novices. Novices means a new convert, a new plant, freshly planted. Right? That's actually the picture of the word novice. It's freshly planted. Pastors are not meant to be novices. They need to have already been in the faith for a while, proving themselves faithful and proving that they have learned the things they need to learn before they go try to lead others. This is a very similar concept here. Don't just go randomly grab somebody out of the congregation. Or maybe I should say, don't just pick the guy that raised his hand and said, yeah, I'll do it. Does he meet all of those qualifications above? Does he hold fast to the mystery with a pure conscience? And by the way, prove him a little bit. That word proved is this idea of to test. You would say it this way in a court of law, to examine them, right? To examine them. The idea here is that anybody that's going to be installed in a role of deacon, you need to have taken your time. You've needed to examine them. In that examination, they need to have proved themselves. And then you can let them use the office of a deacon. It's not the other way around. You don't take somebody who you want to try to prove and put them in the role and see if they can prove themselves. You don't do it that way. I think we forget that sometimes, right? I think people forget that in the role of a pastor. I think people forget that in the role of a deacon. Honestly, I would expand that into other roles in the church. If you're going to put somebody in any kind of leadership role in the church, they need to have proven themselves already. I've talked about this a few times. I'll say it again. I used to be a trainer for work. I trained people. I knew a lot about the software before they ever put me in as a trainer. But you know what? I learned so much more by having to train other people. It's a good training model. You can apply that to a knowledge perspective. You can say, well, I think we're going to put them in this role of training or teaching. Hey, listen, doing that, we'll take the knowledge they have and we'll let them expand that knowledge. If I had been lousy with people and didn't have a good reputation and was super harsh and didn't know how to work through conflict and didn't know how to treat people, I don't care how much knowledge I had, I would have been a lousy teacher. You have to learn certain things and prove your character before you can step into a role and then grow in knowledge. Okay? That's a lot of what this verse is driving at. But let these also first be proved, tested, examined. I'm going to leave that next phrase out, being found blameless. And then I'll come back to that middle verse, that middle section of the verse, right? So read it this way. Let these also be proved, tested or examined, being found blameless. You remember when we talked about the role of a pastor, the word blameless does not mean perfect, because there is no perfect person other than Jesus Christ. You and I, saved, redeemed, trying to live by the fruit of the Spirit, there's not a one of us that are perfect. We all still fight against sin every day. But the word blameless means unaccused or irreproachable. This gets a little tricky. You pick out these people who you think are good, honest men, ready to take on the role of a deacon, and in the course of this, you sit down with them and you start to have some conversation, you ask them some questions, you're kind of examining this role. Are they ready for it? Are these the right people? And in the course of that conversation, you start to find out that there might be some stuff that could look a little suspect, a little, I hate to use the word shady, but like there's just some stuff that like in a certain situation, somebody could lay out some accusations that would call into doubt whether or not they're really performing the role the way they should. Be careful, right? You don't want to install somebody in that position where 6 months down the road, somebody's going to come out and say, well, this is what happened to me, and this is what occurred. And then now suddenly, the church and that individual are in an awkward position because, well, we picked this person, we examined this person, and now we put them in this role. If you find something, here's what I'm driving at. If you find something, take it serious, right? I would apply the same stuff to selecting a pastor, guys. I mean, we're talking about the role of a deacon. It used the word blameless for pastors too. If I ever leave or die or whatever, right, and you guys are calling a pastor, you guys need to sit down and examine him. You need to ask him questions. What's he believe? Try to dig in and find out what his character's like. Ask him the hard questions. Hey, listen, if we call you, is there something in your past we need to be aware of? Hopefully it's not somebody you know nothing about, and maybe you've got some other people you can call and ask and find out about this person. It needs to be somebody that has proven themselves, and that they're not going to be able to just simply, you get them installed here in this position, and the next thing you know, there's all these accusations coming. right? They need to be irreproachable. They need to be not be able to be called up with some kind of accusation. And I get it. Listen, anybody can make an accusation against somebody else, okay? So just the very mere statement of an accusation is one thing. But do you understand why, knowing that that could happen, do you understand why that it's important that that person, to the best of your ability, has proven themselves, has been faithful, has an honest reputation, and you've examined them, and you found that, listen, there's nothing we can find that'll lay to their charge. If an accusation is made, you'd much rather have somebody that you have vetted like that than for accusations to come in and you already have your own doubts about that individual. You start to see some of what I'm saying. There's some very good spiritual reasons for what we're saying. There's also very good practical reasons for what we're saying. All right, we've got about 10 minutes, and these next few verses will probably take me longer than 10 minutes. I'm going to read these real quick. I might say one or two things, and then we'll probably save. I don't trust myself and my ability to get this done in 10 minutes. So listen to this. Even so must their wives be grave, not slanderers, sober, faithful in all things. Let the deacons be the husband of one wife, ruling their children and their own houses well. For they that have used the office of a deacon well purchase to themselves a good degree and great boldness in faith, which is in Christ Jesus. What I would say here, and we'll get into this probably next time, as you look at these verses, when it gets here to the deacon, it actually starts to call out the requirements for the wife as well. Now, let me ask you something. Seven men in the book of Acts were called to take care of the daily ministrations of the church, including caring for the widows. I don't know about you. I don't want to read too much between the lines. I got to believe that 7 men would probably need the help of their wives in some of the stuff that would be required in taking care of the widows. Whether that's what needed to be purchased, preparing some of the food, whatever, right? I find it hard to believe personally that the wives would not have been involved in the work of some of the work that the men were doing. But let's even say that wasn't the case. Don't you think that a lot of these wives would have been involved? At least they would have heard from their husbands the stuff that's going on, the things they're having to deal with, the disputes that they're working through, how they work through those things. This person's in need. This person's in deep need. This person's in need because this happened. How is it going to be if the wife of that person is, let's say, a slanderer? It's not going to be good, is it? Most slanderers that I know are also great gossips. It kind of comes with the territory. Not going to play well as he's going out trying to do his duties, learning the things of the church, being involved in some of the business of the church, probably coming home and visiting with his wife, or she's there with him as he's doing some of it, and then she goes off and starts blah, 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 blah. Right? Well, you know what I heard. Well, that person, we helped them, but it's going to interfere with the duties that the deacon has, if that's what's going on. It's going to undermine the role that he has and what he needs to be doing, okay? And there's more to it than that. We'll get into that. We'll get into that next time. And I really want to, I'll tell you what I want to do. I want to cover each of those qualifications for the wife I want to talk about the fact that he needs to be the husband of one wife and rule his house well. And we'll take the opportunity as we work through those two verses to show you how some people try to take these verses and say, yes, it's okay for a woman to be a deacon. We'll tackle that. We'll talk about that controversy again in the light of these verses and try to answer any rebuttals, I guess, that people would have about a woman being a deacon. Okay. All right, so that's a future look at next time, okay? All right, let's go ahead and let's have a song.